Millionaire comes home earlier than usual. And can't believe his eyes. Richard Matthews was a man who measured his days in calendars and closings, not in bedtime stories. By habit and by a ruthless kind of pride, he never crossed the threshold of his Upper East Side townhouse before 9 at night. The staff knew it. His wife, Christina, counted on it. And his 4-year-old son Daniel, the boy with the purple pediatric crutches, had learned to stop waiting for the jingle of his father's keys. That Tuesday, the rule cracked. The investor dinner in a glass tower downtown wrapped early. The numbers were strong, the handshakes perfunctory. Richard told his driver to head home and didn't text anyone. He sat in the back of the black SUV watching the city flicker by, the reflection of his own face ghosting in the window, a 42-year-old CEO who could command a boardroom but not always a conversation with a preschooler. Somewhere between Midtown and 72nd Street, an uninvited thought got in. What would it feel like to be home before the house went quiet? The townhouse was a pre-war stunner, high ceilings, crown molding, a runner along the stairs that still creaked in the same 2 spots. He let himself in with the soft click of the brass key. No voices. No TV. Just the hush of a well-kept life. Then he saw them. In the middle of the living room, on her knees with a rag in one hand and a spray bottle in the other, Emily Carter, 28, the housekeeper with the rolled sleeve work shirts and always tied back hair, was scrubbing orange juice off the oak. Her dark ponytail had a stray wisp stuck to her cheek. The sleeves of her navy work pants were damp at the knees, like she'd been there a while. Next to her stood Daniel, balanced on those tiny purple crutches he hated and needed in equal measure, a white dish towel gripped in both hands. He was dabbing at the floor with the solemn concentration of a surgeon. Blonde bangs fell into his eyes. He puffed them away without letting go of the towel. "And Emily, I can do this part," he said, stretching, the crutches wobbling as his little arms reached farther than his legs could promise. Emily's voice, gentle, warm, unhurried, filled the room. It was a tone Richard had never heard from her, maybe had never listened for. "Easy, Danny. You've already helped me so much today. Why don't you sit on the couch and supervise while I finish the heavy lifting?" "But I want to help," he insisted, jaw set in a way that looked uncomfortably familiar. "You said we're a team." Richard stayed in the shadow of the foyer arch, unseen. It stopped him cold, the smallness and the strength of the scene, the simple fact of his son smiling while he worked. When had he last seen that smile at home? When had he last earned it? "All right, my little helper." Emily relented, accepting the towel so he could steady himself. "Just a little more than couch boss duty. Deal?" Daniel's blue eyes shone. He turned, too fast, and spotted the figure by the door. "Dad! You're home early!" Surprise pitched his voice high. One crutch slipped. He windmilled to catch himself. Emily reacted first, quick as a reflex. She dropped the rag, one hand hovering at Daniel's shoulder without quite grabbing him, the practiced, respectful touch of someone who knew exactly how much help to give and no more. Only then did she look up and see Richard. She straightened so quickly the spray bottle clinked against the wood. "Good evening, Mr. Matthews. I didn't know you were here. I was just finishing up." She wiped her hands on her apron, eyes down. Richard stepped farther into the room, his gaze moving from the damp patch on the floor to the little boy with the towel to the woman who suddenly looked like she wished the parquet would open and swallow her. "Daniel," he said, slow and careful the way you approach a skittish animal, or a truth. "What are you doing?" "I'm helping Aunt Emily." Daniel took 2 determined, wobbly steps, the crutches thudding soft on the rug. "Look, Daddy. Today I stood by myself for almost 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The words landed heavier than they should have. Physical therapy had given him timelines, months to build core strength, months more for balance. But this was Daniel, saying it like a victory he owned. Richard's eyes flicked to Emily. 5 minutes? He asked, and the question carried a dozen others. Emily folded her hands, the tendons along her thumb white. "We do a little practice when there's time," she said, so quietly he almost had to lean in. "During my lunch or after I finish chores." Never instead of them. Practice, he repeated. The word tasted foreign in his mouth. Exercises? She nodded, bracing for the reprimand. Just basic balance and strength. Nothing unsafe. I would never. No! Daniel cut in, planting his crutches like stakes and putting himself between them, 4 years old and all defiance. Don't be mad, Dad. Aunt Emily is the best. When I cry because it hurts, she doesn't leave. She says I'm strong. Like a warrior. Richard felt something pinch tight under his ribs. He could picture the clinic's white walls and clinical encouragements. The stairway progress was measured there. He could not picture this. The kindness, the patience, the idea of his son as a warrior instead of a diagnosis. He cleared his throat. Buddy, head upstairs, okay? I need to talk with Emily. The words came out gentler than they sounded in his head. Daniel hesitated, eyes darting to Emily. She gave him a small smile that said it's all right better than words. Couch boss can take a break, she murmured. I'll be here. Daniel nodded, turned, and worked his way toward the staircase. On the second step, he craned back. Aunt Emily's the best in the whole world, he announced, as if issuing a legal fact, then disappeared around the bend. Silence swelled and settled. The house's quiet felt different now, not empty, but charged. Richard noticed details he never bothered with. The faint, reddish scrub burns on the backs of Emily's knuckles, the watermarks darkening the knees of her pants, the way she positioned herself so her body could catch a fall without making the boy feel caught. He thought uncomfortably of all the schedules he knew by heart, the trading calendar, school board meetings, the firm's quarterly offsites, and of the one he didn't, his own son's day. How long has this been going on? He asked. Emily's chin dipped, then steadied. Since I started here. About 6 months. She lifted her eyes just enough to meet his. Only during breaks, sir. Or after everything's done. I haven't neglected anything. You don't get paid to be a physical therapist, he said, aware of how cold it sounded and hating it anyway. I'm not a therapist, she answered, a flicker of pride leaking through the nerves. I'm his teammate. He's a special kid. Special how? It came out sharper than he intended. He didn't mean chromosomes or charts, but he heard the old boardroom edge and resented it in himself. Emily took a breath. When she spoke, the tremor had smoothed from her voice. He doesn't quit, Mr. Matthews. Even when it hurts, even when it scares him. He asks the right kind of questions. How many seconds did I get today? Can I try again? And he worries about everyone else while he's doing it. She glanced at the drying patch on the floor and smiled, small and honest. He's spilled his juice, and his first thought was helping me clean it up. That's not common for a kid having a tough day. The pinch tightened. Richard remembered a therapist once telling him that progress didn't only live in muscles, it lived in motivation. He nodded and taken the note, then missed a week of sessions for a roadshow. Where's Christina? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Out to dinner with friends, Emily said. She left around 6. No judgment in her tone, just information. It somehow made him feel worse. He gestured at the rag, at the floor, at everything that was not said. Show me. He stopped himself, recalibrated. I mean, tell me what you've been doing with him. Emily's fingers laced and unlaced, then stilled. Balance holds first, she said, voice warming as if stepping onto familiar ground. We count seconds. He likes numbers, he likes beating yesterday. Some gentle stretches for hip and ankle mobility. Step-ups on the bottom stair with 1 crutch, then none, if he's having a good day. We make it a game. He keeps score. Richard pictured his son counting, chin up, eyes locked on a goal only he could see. He felt both proud and painfully late to his own child's life. From the landing came the faint thunk-thunk of small crutches repositioning. Daniel's voice floated down, tentative. Dad? Richard looked up. A blonde head peeked around the banister. You're not gonna fire Aunt Emily, right? Richard didn't answer right away. He stepped to the base of the stairs and dropped to one knee so he could be eye level with his son. Come here, buddy. Daniel clattered down 2 steps on his purple crutches and stopped, chin trembling. You're not gonna fire Aunt Emily, right? Richard felt the question land like a verdict. No, he said, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. I'm not firing her. He glanced back at Emily, then returned to Daniel. I just need to understand what's going on so I can do right by you. Okay? Daniel's shoulders unknotted. He leaned forward and hugged his dad's neck, the metal cuffs of the crutches knocking softly against Richard's suit. Okay. Upstairs, brush your teeth, and lights out. Tomorrow's a big day. Richard ruffled his hair. Big how? Daniel asked, suspicious and hopeful at the same time. You'll see, Richard said, and sent him up with a wink. When the small footsteps faded, the house slipped back into that charged quiet. Richard stood and faced Emily. She hadn't moved from the edge of the spill, hands clasped in front of her apron, eyes steady now. I owe you an apology, he began. For assuming before asking. Start from the beginning. Why did you decide to do this with him? Emily drew a breath that seemed to square her whole frame. Because I knew how, she said simply. My little brother Micah was born with clubfoot. We spent years at clinics and in physical therapy. At home, my mom worked nights, office cleaning, so I learned the home routines, stretches, balance drills, how to spot without taking over. Micah hated the braces, hated the pain, but he loved winning small battles. Seconds. Steps. I recognized that in Daniel. Richard pictured a teenage girl keeping time with a kitchen timer while her brother wobbled in place, a mother leaving for the subway with a thermos in her bag. Where do you live? He asked, the question startling even himself. Jackson Heights, she said. I take the Q70 to the subway, then the crosstown bus. I'm here by 7:30 to get breakfast going and make sure Daniel is set for his online class on days he has it. And the exercises? During my lunch, she said. Or after I'm done. Never instead. He kept asking me to teach him more, so we made a plan, 30 seconds this week, 35 the next. We turn it into a game. He likes being the one to tell me the score. Richard studied her hands, red and raw in the places where skin meets work. You didn't tell Christina? Emily's eyes flickered. Mrs. Matthews knew, she said carefully. She asked me to be careful. She said what Daniel needed most was someone who believed he could do hard things without making him feel broken. He let that land. It hurt in the way truths do when they arrive late. And you never asked for extra pay. Emily shook her head. It didn't feel like extra. It felt like the part that matters. Then, because she must have seen something guarded cross his face, she added, But if you want me to stop. I don't, he said, fast enough to surprise them both. He cleared his throat, hunting for the right words. I want to see it. Her eyebrows lifted. See it? The exercises. In the morning? If you'll let me watch. For the first time, the tension in her posture softened into a small, honest smile. He'd like that. Good. He checked his watch, then put the watch face down on the mantel, as if disarming an alarm. What time do you start? After breakfast, she said. 8. 8, he repeated, as if fixing a meeting in his calendar. I'll be there. He walked Emily to the kitchen, more out of instinct than need, noting details he'd missed for years. The labeled bins Daniel could reach, the stool tucked near the sink, the magnetized list on the fridge with doodled stars next to words like stretch, balance, and story time. There was a life here, planned, deliberate, loving, that had not required his signature. Upstairs, Daniel called. Good night. Good night, champ, Richard answered, voice catching. When he turned back, Emily had gathered her supplies into a caddy. Mr. Matthews, she said, pausing at the back stair. He really is strong. Stronger than he knows. She hesitated. He talks about you. A lot. About me? He heard the skepticism in his own voice. He says when he can walk without the crutches, he's going to come to your office and make copies and drink grown-up coffee, decaf, I promised him, and learn how to run the numbers like you do. A quick, apologetic smile. His words. Something in Richard loosened and ached all at once. Thank you, he said, and meant it in too many ways to count. After Emily disappeared down the service stairs, he climbed to the second floor. He stopped at Daniel's doorway. The boy was asleep already, crutches propped neatly against the nightstand, towel folded on the dresser as if he'd known to return it. Richard sat on the edge of the bed and watched the small rise and fall of his son's chest, the way sleep made children brave look impossibly young. He pulled out his phone. His calendar was a wall of obligations, an 8 a.m. video call with West Coast investors, a breakfast roundtable at the club, a 9:30 ops review. His thumb hovered. Then he started canceling. One by one, the blocks of color disappeared, replaced by white space that felt reckless and necessary. He texted his chief of staff, family morning. Push everything after 10. No exceptions. The reply came instantly, understood. By the time he reached the primary bedroom, the townhouse had settled into its night rhythm, the radiator's gentle clink, a cab's soft hiss outside. He loosened his tie, rolled his sleeves, and sat in the dark for a minute with the weight of what he'd almost missed. At 11, the elevator door at the back of the hall slid open and Christina came in, heels dangling from 2 fingers, laughter from the evening still on her mouth. She stopped when she saw him. "You're home early," she said, a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Everything okay?" "We need to talk," he said, patting the cushion beside him. She sank into the couch, turned toward him. "About what?" "Daniel," he said. "And Emily. And us." Her expression shuddered, then steadied. "If this is about physical therapists, I've already." "It's not about adding another specialist," he cut in. "It's about the one who already lives under our roof." He told her everything, how he'd walked in and found Emily kneeling on the floor, Daniel on his crutches with a towel, the 5-minute balance hold, the way the boy had put himself between them like a tiny sentinel. He told her about Micah, about the bus, about 30 seconds becoming 35. Christina's eyes glossed, then sharpened. "You think I didn't notice?" she said, heat flaring. "You think I don't see him happier? That I don't see the progress?" I told her to be careful because I didn't want you coming home for 5 minutes and shutting it down out of fear of liability. He flinched. The worst part was how fair it sounded. "I deserve that." "No," she said softer now. "Daniel deserved better. He deserves a dad who shows up for the part that isn't on a chart." He stared at the ceiling, counted the grooves in the molding, and then dropped his gaze back to her. "Tomorrow at 8, I'm watching his workout," he said. "I cancelled my morning." Her mouth parted. In 15 years, she'd learned to translate his calendar better than any assistant. "You cancelled?" The word landed between disbelief and hope. "I did," he exhaled. "I don't want to hear about the seconds he held. I want to count them." Some of the hardness left her posture. "If you mean that, then maybe we can find our way back." "I mean it," he said, and for once it didn't sound like a promise made to a future he hoped would do the work for him. "Set an alarm. He'll want pancakes." "I didn't know that until tonight." Christina laughed, a small, surprised sound. "He calls them power pancakes on Mondays. Says he needs extra energy for battle." "Warrior," Richard murmured, and felt the word settle in his chest like a compass point. They went to bed with alarms set for 6:30. Richard lay awake a long time listening to the house breathe, rehearsing the only meeting that mattered in the morning, a boy, a mat on the grass behind the townhouse, and 30 seconds that might teach his father how to measure time again. The alarm split the darkness at 6:30 a.m., a sound Richard usually associated with boarding gates and quarterly calls. This morning, it meant something different. He swung his legs out of bed, traded his suit for a gray polo and jeans, clothes that felt almost foreign on a weekday, and padded downstairs. The townhouse kitchen smelled like butter already. Emily stood at the stove, hair pinned up, a bowl of batter at her elbow. She glanced up, startled, when she saw him. "Mr. Matthews, good morning. You're up early." "Morning, Emily." He reached for a mug, poured coffee. "Where's Daniel?" "Still asleep. He wakes around 7:30. We usually eat, then do our stretches in the garden." Richard leaned against the counter, watching her stir the batter with deliberate care. Not mechanical, not rushed. Each motion seemed tuned to the idea of making something right for a child who believed pancakes meant power. "He likes pancakes on Mondays," Emily said, catching his look. "Says he needs fuel for his battles." Richard's throat tightened around a laugh. "Christina mentioned that. I never knew." There was a pause heavy with what he didn't add. "I never asked." At 7:20, small footsteps thumped on the stairs. Daniel shuffled in, hair tousled, pajamas wrinkled, crutches clicking on the tiles. He stopped short when he saw his father at the table. "Dad? You didn't go to work?" His blue eyes were wide with disbelief. Richard pushed a plate toward him. "Not today. Today I want to see your exercises. But first, power pancakes." Daniel's grin split wide across his face. He clambered into a chair, crutches leaning on the table edge, and let Emily set a plate before him. "You're really staying?" "I canceled my meetings," Richard said. "I'm here for the morning." Daniel picked up his fork, then set it down again, eyes suspicious. "This isn't like a surprise meeting, is it? You won't leave in the middle?" The question stung. Richard leaned forward, elbows on the table. "No leaving. You have my word." Emily slid into the background, smiling faintly as she poured orange juice. The boy's face relaxed. He attacked the pancakes with the single-minded joy of a 4-year-old who had just won more than breakfast. Afterward, Emily carried a rolled exercise mat and a small step stool out to the garden behind the townhouse. The morning light slanted through the sycamores, gilding the grass. Christina appeared at the kitchen door, robe cinched, watching with wary curiosity. Daniel positioned himself proudly on the mat. "Okay, Dad, watch this. Aunt Emily taught me stretches first." Emily crouched beside him. "Show your dad how we warm up." Daniel lay on his back and slowly lifted one leg, then the other, tiny face pinched with concentration. Richard squatted nearby, heart in his throat. "You see, Mr. Matthews," Emily said quietly, "we start with mobility. Ankles, hips, knees. It wakes the muscles, tells them what's coming." Richard nodded, not trusting his voice. He watched his son's determination, the way Daniel bit his lip but didn't quit. Then Emily set the crutches aside and helped Daniel rise. "Ready for balance hold?" 30 seconds like we practiced." Daniel's chin lifted. "I want to try a whole minute." Emily smiled. "Warriors earn their minutes one battle at a time. Let's do 30 today. 45 tomorrow." Daniel planted his feet, wobbling. Emily crouched close but didn't touch him, arms ready in case he fell. Richard found himself holding his breath. 10 seconds, Emily counted softly. Richard's chest tightened. His son's legs trembled but held. 20. Daniel's eyes flicked toward his father. "You watching?" Richard swallowed. "I'm watching, champ. I see you." 25. Emily's voice was low but strong. Daniel's knees shook, arms stretched out like a tightrope walker. 30. Emily said, swooping a hand close as he sagged. She caught him lightly before he toppled, steadying him back onto the mat. Daniel's cheeks flushed with triumph. "I did it, Dad! I really did it!" Richard bent down, pulled him into a hug, felt the sweat on his son's neck, the hammering of his tiny heart. "You did, Danny. You're incredible. I've never been prouder." Daniel leaned back, eyes shining. "See? Aunt Emily makes me stronger." Richard looked at Emily, at the faint redness in her palms, the quiet steadiness in her face, and for the first time understood that strength was not always built in clinics or meetings. Sometimes it was built in gardens, 30 seconds at a time. Christina, still standing by the door, covered her mouth with one hand. Her eyes were wet. She had not seen her husband like this in years, on the ground, counting seconds with their son. And Richard knew, with a certainty sharper than any stock ticker, that his calendar would never look the same again. By the time the clock on the kitchen wall struck 9, Richard's entire sense of priority had shifted. He was still in jeans, his phone face down on the patio table, his tie forgotten upstairs. Instead of reports and numbers, his morning was filled with the sight of Daniel beaming, sweaty from effort, and Emily coaching with the patience of someone who believed every second mattered. After the last stretch, Daniel collapsed onto the mat, chest rising and falling like he'd run a marathon. Emily offered him water. "Great work, warrior. That's enough for today. Tomorrow we go for 45 seconds. Daniel gulped the water, then turned to his dad. "Did you see? I almost made it longer." "I saw every second," Richard said. "And tomorrow I'll be right here again." The boy's grin lit up his whole face. "Promise?" "Promise," Richard replied, and for once it didn't feel like a word said to ease a child. It felt like a contract he intended to keep. When Daniel went upstairs to shower, Emily began rolling up the mat. Richard lingered, watching her. For the first time, he noticed the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes, the way her shoulders carried not just housework but something heavier, responsibility, love, determination. "Emily," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised at the softness in his tone. "Why didn't you ever tell me? About your brother? About knowing these exercises?" She hesitated, then spoke slowly. "Because it didn't seem important for you to know, sir. What mattered was Daniel. He needed someone to believe in him between appointments. Someone who could give him practice without making it feel like therapy. Just life." Richard nodded, but guilt pressed down. "And all this time, I was too busy to see any of it." "You provide for him, Mr. Matthews," she said. "That matters too." He shook his head. "Money doesn't smile at him when he's wobbling on his feet. Money doesn't tell him he's a warrior." His voice cracked despite himself. Emily lowered her gaze, uncomfortable with his vulnerability, but she didn't look away. "Daniel needs both. The roof and the belief. Sometimes one parent can't give both all the time. That's why families have more than one heart." Her words echoed long after she returned inside. That evening, Richard waited in the living room until Christina came home from her lunch engagement. She dropped her handbag on the console, pausing when she saw him still there in casual clothes, no laptop on his lap. "You didn't go back to the office?" she asked, eyebrows lifting. "No," Richard said. "I stayed. I watched Daniel's session. And I realized something I should have known a long time ago." He rose and crossed the room to her. "Emily isn't just cleaning floors here. She's been giving our son something I never managed to: confidence. Hope." Christina's eyes narrowed, defensive. "I told her she could continue. I didn't hide it from you. I only worried you'd shut it down with talk of liability and risks." Richard sighed. "You were right to worry. That's exactly what I would have done. Until today." He paused, searching her eyes. "Chris, when was the last time I sat on the grass with him? Counted seconds? Cheered his effort instead of his numbers?" She shook her head. "It's been years. I can't change those years," he admitted. "But I can change tomorrow. And the day after." For a long time Christina studied him, weighing his words against all the times he had promised before. At last she exhaled. "If you mean it, then show us. Be here. Consistently. That's what Daniel needs. That's what I need." "I will," Richard said. The certainty in his voice startled even him. That night, long after Daniel was asleep, Richard stood in his son's room. The crutches were leaned carefully against the nightstand. On the dresser lay a piece of paper, crayon scribbles declaring, "Daniel's warrior chart, 30 seconds, 35, 40. Complete with stars Emily must have drawn." Richard touched the chart with the gentlest hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, purpose that wasn't tied to profit. He realized then that this wasn't just about Daniel's legs. It was about Daniel's spirit. And maybe his own. Tomorrow, he would show up again. Not as Richard Matthews, the man with meetings, but as Dad. The next morning dawned clear, sunlight spilling between the tall buildings of Manhattan and pouring into the townhouse garden. Richard was already awake before his alarm rang. He had showered, dressed simply in a sweatshirt and sneakers, and was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when Emily arrived from the early bus ride. She nearly dropped her bag when she saw him there. "Good morning, Mr. Matthews," she said, uncertain if this was a coincidence. "Morning, Emily," Richard replied. "And it's Richard, when we're not in front of investors or lawyers." Her lips quirked in surprise, but she didn't argue. She moved naturally into her routine, setting out cereal for later, starting batter for the day's pancakes. Richard stood, gestured to the counter. "Can I help?" Emily hesitated, then passed him a whisk. He stirred clumsily, spilling flour across the marble. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Daniel will like them anyway. He says pancakes taste better when they're made by a team." By the time Daniel padded downstairs, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, the smell of butter and syrup filled the house. He stopped on the last stair, staring at the sight of his father at the stove flipping pancakes. "Dad?" His voice was full of astonishment. "You're cooking?" Richard grinned. "With help. Don't tell anyone at the office, it'll ruin my reputation." Daniel laughed, a sound that carried like sunlight, and hurried forward on his crutches. He ate hungrily, then clapped his hands when Emily announced it was time for exercises. In the garden, Richard sat cross-legged on the grass, Christina watching from the doorway. Emily laid out the mat, helped Daniel stretch, then guided him into his balance drills. "Okay, champion," Emily said. 30 seconds again. Let's see if you can push further." Daniel steadied himself, gripping nothing, arms stretched wide. His knees trembled, face taut with effort. Richard leaned forward, every second etched into his chest. 20, 25, 30. Emily's voice counted softly. "Dad, look!" Daniel gasped, still upright. "I see you, buddy. Keep going!" Richard's voice was thick, but strong. 35, 40, 45. Emily's eyes widened with delight. She steadied him when he finally toppled into her arms. Daniel burst into laughter. "Did you see? I broke my record!" Richard scooped him up, crutches forgotten in the grass. "I saw everything. You're stronger than I ever imagined." His own eyes blurred, and he pressed a kiss to the boy's hair before he even realized what he was doing. Christina stepped out then, wrapping her robe tight against the morning chill. She looked at her husband holding their son like something precious, and her expression softened in a way it hadn't in years. Later, when Daniel went upstairs to shower, Richard lingered in the garden with Emily. "He trusts you," he said quietly. Emily looked down. "He needed someone to believe in him." "You've given him more than belief," Richard admitted. "You've given him progress. Hope. And you've given me a wake-up call." He paused. "Emily, what if we made this official? What if you weren't just our housekeeper, but Daniel's therapy coach?" Emily's eyes flew open, startled. "Mr. Matt, Richard, I'm not certified. I don't have a degree. Everything I know comes from caring for my brother." "Then I'll pay for you to study," he said firmly. "I'll cover classes, books, everything. You'll keep working with Daniel, but you'll be building a future too. For him, and for yourself." For the first time since he'd known her, Emily's composure broke. Tears filled her eyes. "You would do that? You've already done more for my son than I ever managed in 4 years," Richard said. "It's the least I can do." Emily wiped her face quickly, embarrassed. But her smile trembled with gratitude. "Thank you. I'll work as hard as I can. For Daniel. For my family. For myself." Richard nodded. "Then it's settled. You'll be his official coach. And I'll be here every morning to watch." That night, Richard stood again at Daniel's bedside. His son was asleep, one arm flung across his stuffed bear, the warrior chart now updated with 45 seconds, scrawled in red crayon. Richard touched the page gently. He realized this was only the beginning. His son wasn't just learning to stand, he was teaching his father how to show up, how to fight battles worth fighting. Weeks melted into months, and the Matthews household no longer revolved around board meetings and late-night conference calls. Mornings became sacred. Richard was there without fail, sitting cross-legged on the grass, clapping for every second Daniel held his balance, cheering for every step he managed without his crutches. Emily, no longer just a housekeeper, was now Daniel's official therapy coach. Richard had enrolled her in evening classes for physical therapy at a community college uptown, and each time she came back with new knowledge, she poured it into Daniel's sessions. Slowly, the boy's wobbling steps turned into steady strides. One chilly autumn morning, as leaves scattered across the garden, Daniel stood tall without his crutches and took 5 steps toward his father. His face glowed with triumph. "Dad! Look! I'm walking by myself!" Richard felt tears sting his eyes as he rushed forward to catch him in a hug. "You're doing more than walking, champ, you're flying." Christina, watching from the kitchen window, pressed her hand to her mouth. She hadn't seen her husband cry in years, but now he cried openly, with pride. She stepped outside, wrapped her arms around both of them, and for the first time in a long while, the 3 of them felt like a family again. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, Richard sat with Christina in the quiet living room. "You were right," he admitted softly. "All those years, I thought success meant deals and numbers. But success is watching our son take steps on his own. Success is hearing him laugh." Christina leaned her head on his shoulder. "It's all we ever wanted, Rich. For him to be happy. For us to be present." Richard squeezed her hand. "From now on I'll be here. Not just with my body, but with my heart." Weeks later came the milestone no one expected so soon. Daniel had begged to join his classmates in a small school performance. On the day of the event, the auditorium was packed with parents. Richard and Christina sat in the front row, Emily beside them, nervously twisting her fingers. When Daniel stepped onto the stage, without crutches, the audience gasped. He stood proud, his little chest rising with courage. "My name is Daniel Matthews," he said into the microphone, voice trembling but strong. "When I was little, I couldn't walk without help. But I learned that if you keep trying, and if people believe in you, you can do more than you ever thought possible. I want to thank my mom, my dad, and Aunt Emily, who taught me to be a warrior." Then, with every eye on him, Daniel walked across the stage, 8 steps, unassisted. The crowd erupted in applause, people rising to their feet. Christina sobbed openly. Richard stood clapping harder than anyone, his face wet with tears. Emily wept quietly, pride shining brighter than any spotlight. Later, backstage, Daniel actually ran, into Richard's arms. "Dad, did you see? I did it!" Richard hugged him tight, whispering into his hair. "I saw everything, champ. And I'll never stop watching." That night, the 3 adults sat together in the living room, Daniel asleep upstairs. Richard turned to Emily. "You've given him more than therapy," he said. "You've given him his childhood back. You've given us our family back." Emily shook her head, tears on her cheeks. "All I did was believe in him." "No," Richard corrected gently. "You believed in him until we learned how to believe, too." The townhouse, once silent and cold, now rang with laughter and warmth. Richard knew the truth now. Real wealth wasn't in the empire he had built downtown, but in the little boy who called him Dad, in the woman who had stood by when he was absent, and in the young housekeeper who had walked into their lives and changed them all forever. As he turned out the lights that evening, Richard whispered a quiet promise to himself: "Never again will I let meetings matter more than moments." And in the stillness of the night, for the first time in years, he felt whole.